On Saturday, April 8th, 2023, I joined a number of retro computing enthusiasts from the lower part of the North Island of New Zealand to take part in the 3rd Vintage Computer Meetup. Whilst it may not be in the same league as the similar meetups that happen in the US, it's still a great chance to meet with people that are like-minded and look at their interesting retro machines and hear their stories all about them. In this video, you'll see all of the exhibits, including lots of Apple 8-bits, a NextStation, lots of Sinclair machines and mods, Spectravideo, Commodore, Tandy, IBM, Jupiter and Sharp machines. Thanks heaps to David Otter for arranging it all, and here's to NZVCM 2024.
I don't have an Apple II, I have a wanted list. If you have an Apple II without a plus or an E on the end, I'm keen to get one. But this is the kind of setup you would have had back in the day. That one's not actually powered on. Apple III, a pimped out 2E, 2C and a 2E Platinum. So yeah, feel free to play with any of them. I wrote up little things, but you probably know most of what's written on them. This is my Apple III. So the Apple III has a really cool sort of history. So Apple had the Apple II and they were worried that their company wouldn't survive just with one computer, because back in those days everyone was releasing new versions of computers every year. And they also wanted to make a business-friendly computer. So a lot of people ended up using the Apple IIs for their business, but it was more of a hobbyist machine. So you'd need to open it up, you'd need to add 80-column card, you'd need to put your own card in for the drives, maybe a serial card, whereas the 3 came with all of that built in. So it came with a floppy drive, it came with the serial, the 80 columns. And they were worried about IBM coming with the PC.
Yeah, because this was released in the year prior to the IBM PC coming out. This is 1980.
And it's got a really cool architecture. So it has Apple II compatibility, but it still uses a 6502, but it's higher speed. And it can address more memory via a fancy bank switching circuit that it's got in it, and with the 5 meg hard drive, I think earlier than IBM shipped with hard drives.
Yeah.
So it was pretty modern for the time, and businesses could buy it and plug it in, and it worked. You know, everything was already there, and I think at the time it was also the version of VisiCalc with the most RAM, so you could have the biggest spreadsheets on the Apple III.
You know, this is all my stuff. This is in fact my ZX81 from when I was a kid, so it still works. So got a nice little display of the 16K with, I mean the 48K with the micro drives, 128 running this cartridge. We also have this Russian clone computer, ZX Spectrum, which imported from Russia. My wife gave it to me as a gift. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's my little display.
Cool. What's the spec of the Russian clone? Exactly the same?
Yeah, it's actually just about the same. Z80A with 3.5 megahertz. It says it's got a RAM of 64K, but I'm not sure if it's bank switched or not. You know, I'm not sure what the ROM situation is.
But at least it's got a proper keyboard.
Yeah, I mean,
the Russians obviously looked at Sinclair.
Yeah.
We're going to put a proper keyboard on this. It's probably been into space a couple of times too.
Done a few orbits.
So, I brought the NextStation Turbo along with me this time. I'm sure many people will know the history of Next. It was formed by Steve Jobs in 1985 after he was depending on the interpretation you hear, fired by John Scully from Apple. Next's first product was the Next Cube, which was a 30 centimetre magnesium alloy cube in a beautiful satin black. This is how it fits in with all the Sinclairs you see. It's a nice black colour.
Well, you don't see it going from white to sort of orange though, do you, with all the black stuff? So it ages well.
They were an incredibly expensive workstation class machine at the time that they were built. This one is the last and highest spec model that they made, NextStation Turbo, which is a 33 megahertz 68040. This one's been pimped out with, I upgraded it last night from 32 to 64 megs of RAM. So the company folded in 96. This model was probably 94, 95. Despite the high price, they, even though they didn't sell well, there were some really there were some things that he did with Next that really did change the market. It was the first computer to have a consumer-grade laser printer available. It made PostScript something that was available to the home publisher, which it never had been before. It actually uses PostScript as the language that is used for the display on the Next computers. So when you talk about WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. It is exactly what you've got to get on the screen is exactly what you'll print. It's the same language. And of course, the technology in this was the basis behind Mac OS X at Apple. The OS kernel is an evolution of the same Mac kernel. The GUI, it moved from display PostScript to display PDF. Good really quite a neat machine.
Now, didn't they use the Next for doing Toy Story?
I think it was, yeah. Because of course Steve Jobs was the director of Pixar as well.
That's right, yeah.
Was it also used for like Doom development? ID used it as a development.
I think that they used it as a development platform, but there was never an official release for it. So this is a port. This is it's a native port, but it lacks sound, unfortunately.
And
it looks surprisingly good for monochrome.
Yeah.
PostScript.
And Tim Berners-Lee developed the first web browser on a Next.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. In fact, I don't have it installed, but you can download the original web browser and run it on the Next as well. So, yeah, a real piece of history.
Does that model have the magneto-optical drive, or was that only ever in the Cube?
That was the Cube. Yeah. This has a 2.88 meg, 3.5 inch floppy, and SCSI 1 hard drive.
For Intel, is it Next Step for Intel? Is that ever come out?
Yes. So it did, yes, and it was pretty widely used. And then that became OpenStep. So it's that was the evolution. They stopped building their own hardware and just focused on the NextStep environment.
So this is a bit of my Sinclair stuff. I collect sort of Sinclair, Commodore and Apple as well, but I thought the car's only big enough for one thing really. So of course, Sinclair started off with the calculators. I think this is probably one of their prettier ones, the Sovereign. I guess it was sort of in the 70s, wasn't it, with the calculators, and then he kind of moved off into computers with old Chris Curry. So the ZX80, that was the first Sinclair one. It was the MK14 was before that, but that was kind of collaboration, and then it kind of went off in their separate ways. But it's typical Sinclair. It's a nasty old computer. I think it still works, but it's hard to tell because these things. It's you get a picture on the screen and you squeeze your eyeballs together, you kind of can see text. But no, it's just. But it's history, isn't it? Of course, then we sort of as we move on through, the Sinclair stuff kind of gets a bit better. The old 81 with its better keyboard. Not as rubbish to that, not as good as that, or any sort of PC type of thing. And then of course you've got your Spectrum with its rubber keyboard. Feels like dead flesh. And then into the Spectrum Pluses with a proper keyboard that worked really lovely. Ish. Yeah, with still a membrane under there, which I guess a lot of them were, but it's surprisingly the 128 became really popular. They're like hen's teeth to find. I mean, you can get all this stuff quite easily, but the 128, I don't know, I never really saw them over here, mostly in the UK. They were really popular. But yeah, then we sort of move on to, actually, to be honest, mostly Amstrad, wasn't it? Because I think the 128 was the last one that Sinclair had, and then sold to Amstrad where you get the +2 and the +3. I mean, the QL, of course, was Sinclair, but that was a beast. And then back to the ZD88, which was the last Sinclair. I'll just.
Two shifts, both shift keys.
Both shift keys, there we go. There we go, yes. So the ZD88, which was back to Sinclair again, and sort of the last thing he produced, really. But no, looks like he kind of went back to his dead flesh keyboard. But yeah, that's a bit of Sinclair history anyway.
More Spectrum stuff. More Spectrum stuff.
So this stuff's working.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably the interesting thing, is really the amount of components, modern components and other bits and pieces that are being produced for these days to actually keep them up and going. And a lot of actually what we've got here, you'll be aware of a guy out of Caddy, a guy Charlie Ingley, who develops Euler chips and drives and other bits and pieces. Which is doing a fantastic job in keeping some of these going. So QL, which I picked up off Grant a year or two back now. Again from Charlie, a modern power supply. These things have a weird power connector on them. The power supply is a bit strange. I found with the one that came with it, it was pretty flaky and I didn't really want to go delving around inside it. So modern power supply straight in there with a 3D printed plug, which plugs into the back of the unit. And then alongside it there, again, Charlie went and produced a what's called a V drive, which essentially is an SD card which emulates microdrives and allows you to basically run with those instead of the crazy little microdrive cartridges that those things typically run with. Similarly with the Spectrums, again, a lot of modern components these days to go and fix things that are there. Again, this particular one has one of his Eulers inside it, but it also has a little extension off that Euler chip which allows you to do direct RGB out of the Spectrum into the back of the monitor there, TV in this case. So really, really good picture, even better than just the normal composite mods that you typically see on these things. And again, another one of these V drives, so you can emulate your microdrives with SD cards in there, which work really, really well. We've got a number of microdrives here. We were going to try and kit out the full kind of 8 drives and interface and other bits and pieces, but yeah, the hard bit to find is actually the connectors that go between the microdrives. They're just rare as hen's teeth, and nobody actually makes them as of yet, so kind of interesting from that point of view. Another thing that we're going to try while we're here is actually the networking. So the interface ones that have a networking port in between them, and so there's a game that I've got there called TT Racer, which apparently supports networking multiplayers across multi-spectrums. So we'll give that a go. The game's terrible, but we'll see if we can get the networking working. And again, similarly with the other models here, again, lots of modern components. The +3 that I've got here has got a GoTech drive in there, again, just emulating the floppy drives. Again, working really, really well. The other interesting thing which I picked up only a couple of months ago, that's a standard Spectrum inside there, but this is a modern keyboard, standard normal cherry key switches, and that's a 3D printed case. The case is beautiful. The biggest problem with this is when you're typing, you keep wanting to hit spacebar with your thumb, but no, it's standard location over there. So yeah,
It's very pretty, isn't it?
it's really nice. It's really quite nice.
So that's just the old 48K rubber key one.
It's just
inside
this,
the new
new
case.
same old motherboard straight in, new case.
But not a membrane. It's the physical hard keys with the PCB, and then there's like the wires that go down the plug-in.
Yeah.
The idea that you had a RGB.
It works really, really well. There's a number of different solutions for that. Matt's Spectrum over there is actually connected to an OSSC box, which basically converts the SCART connector into an HDMI plug, which then he plugs into his monitor. There's other interfaces like this one, which basically plug in the back and have a SCART plug on the back, so you can do RGB out of that. The solution that Charlie's put together there, where it's just an interface or just a little tiny box that goes on the back and RGB out, works really, really well. So.
I mean, if we had screens this clear when we were kids, we never would have gone blind, would we?
No.
I mean,
But I usually collect Spectravideo, as most of you know, but I decided to bring some more eclectic stuff that I have that I've sort of branched into. The most recent one I've got is the Atom, which I brought in from the States. This is just some of my eclectic stuff. In the Spectravideo line, they brought out a computer add-on for the Atari 2600. This is one thing I've been looking at for a long, long time. They are around, but they tend to be very, very expensive, and I did actually do a trade for this one. It works, not 100%. They turned it into, like, I think it was an 8 or 16K computer. A bit like the Spectrums and the ZX81s, they were one of those crappy keyboards. They're not very good. The basic wasn't very good either. Then there's the Coleco Vision. I picked this up in New Zealand. The box is a bit knocked around, but the machine is complete, but it's US, unfortunately. But as I say, I do Spectravideo, and I actually have the Coleco add-on for me 328. So all the cartridges get used on that. So that was just more of a display. Then I bought the Atom just recently, and I got it as a complete set. It's all US, unfortunately. The biggest problem with the Atom when they came out was the printer, and people used to send them back after they bought them saying they were faulty, and that was because they used to throw out a huge EMF pulse when they turned on. And you were in big warning letters inside the documentation, you do not leave a tape or that in the tape drive, because when you turn it on it'll be blank, because it puts out that bigger EMF pulse. So it was you turn it on, and then after you turn it on, you put the tape in and away you go. Now a lot of people sort of, oh, they're audio tapes. They are not. They are a high-speed digital data drive. They were developed by HP for ColecoVision, and they run an encoder wheel where most of them have the capstan wheel for pinching the tape. These have an encoder on them. So what it does is every time you put a tape in, winds it right back to the beginning, and then the encoder actually counts how long the tape is. So they were high speed, and they could actually pull up data as fast as a disk drive back in the day, which was one of the big points with them. Later on they worked out a way around you can use normal audio tapes, which I have one that's been altered, but they had to be the high quality tapes, and most of them are like Sony's or BASF or something like that. This is one of the Spectravideos, but it's one of the more obscure ones. This was their XT version of a PC. Called SVI 640. These came out completely 640k of RAM. They came out with one floppy, two floppies, or a floppy and a 20 meg hard drive. They also have MSX built into them, so they have the MSX video, sound, and they can actually have up to 16k of video RAM for the MSX. Natively built in mono, VGA and TV. Mono, CGA and TV, sorry, built into them. So, and this is actually a working machine, this one. And this is some of the stuff I've got, which these are called SVI 808. There was a model called an 828 and an 838, which was also labelled the Express 16. These are basically an XT 256K, but these also had built-in MSX capabilities in them as well, and they had built-in CGA out, mono out and TV out on them as well. This was built by a company of an offshoot of Bondwell, which was called Franken Computers. And they built them for Spectravideo. This top one is a Spectravideo unit. It's missing the button because I've got the power supply out of it. The bottom one was built by the same company but branded Franken. So when Spectravideo ended up going by the buy with Bondwell, Franken branded it themselves. Exactly the same internally. They have a slot in the side that you can put in the MSX game cartridge. That you put this board in and then it turns it into an MSX1 computer as well. And because of the way they're built, the video and everything's on the board. So there was no alteration or anything, it just went through the same ports and everything.
Was the MSX, that standard, was that Z80 based?
Yes. Yes.
So those machines, you said, did you say they were PCs? But
yeah.
So then they also had Z80s in it as well,
yeah,
to run the MSX stuff.
Yeah. It's a bit the same as the Coleco Adams was along that way as well. The Coleco, when they built the Atom, when Coleco finally got on to getting all the parts, their biggest problem was they had so many companies building bits for them. Like HP did the drives and so on and so on. And there was delays. Everybody was delayed in getting stuff to them. And that put them behind the 8 ball, and that's why they rushed and cut corners and they had this EMF problem and so forth with the printers. So when they put it out, they shut down their Coleco game manufacturing side. They made a pile of bloody boards, put them all there and said this will keep us going. And they went in producing the Atom full time, which was a downfall because the Coleco sold out so quick, they ran out of stock. So what they did is they rehashed the board, and in the Atom they put a Coleco version inside the Atom. So they're two separate PCs. And that's why when you look at the Atom, they have 2 resets on it. And with the reset, you pull reset 1, it resets the Atom. The Atom is just a network board with extra RAM and that in it. That's how it works on a 6-pin RJ12 network system. That's how it works. You can have up to 128 devices plugged into it. Each system runs its own 6801 processor. There's 3 of them in the Atom. And when you pull the second reset, it fires up the ColecoVision and switches the Atom out. And so with that system, when they did that, they made it so that the ColecoVision was hot swappable with the cartridges. So you could pull one out, put another one, pull the reset, and away you go. Whereas in the old days, you had to power it off, change the cartridge, power it back on, and away you go. But yeah, they made it hot swappable. And they all use the same video, audio, and so forth. The worst thing they did with as you can see if you have a look inside it there, they've got 3 expansion ports, they're all different. Not all of them have the same connections, because this port is for this port is for this port is for this. It's crazy. And then they have a side port which has everything. But other than that, it was a really good design. They had RGB built into them, and I mean, I plugged this, and when I fire it up, I just plug it into a Commodore 64 monitor. I mean, a Amiga monitor, 1084s. Picture straight away. Yeah, no problem.
What year was the Atom?
83.
83.
I really like on this huge big box, it says everything you need in one package.
That was their
With that size
point.
box, you'd hope everything you need is in there.
That was one of their biggest sellers. In the US, when the PCs came out, these were outselling the PC.
Right.
In the US when they came out. And that was because you could go to the store, buy the box, take it home. You had a daisy wheel, letter quality printer. And everything was in one unit. And it was built in firmware. You can go straight into word processing and had display writer built into it. Word processor built in, all in ROM, and you could just go bang straight in and start typing letters and so forth. That was the big selling point. And then you had the ColecoVision so for the kids to play games and so forth, things like that.
Here we have a few pets. This is the 3032. The 30 stands for basic 3 and 32K of RAM. I got this off Jacob, say January last year or the year before. He put these ROMs in so you can just type a system call and the Space Invaders come up and you can play it. Typically with a PET, there's 2 screws and you can access the internals here. and very nice to work on. Yes, so yeah, this is 4016. This is the one that came from my brother. It's got 32k of RAM in it at the moment, but typically, as the Commodore did back then, they had the same 2001-N motherboard, which had capacity of 32k RAM, but 4 of those RAM slots they drilled holes in, so you couldn't upgrade them yourself. And that's my brother actually bought an extra board, an extra 16k of RAM. I managed to repair the holes in the motherboard so that I could put some little links in and get 32k of RAM, as it should have done in the first place. So yeah, that's basic 4. At that stage it's got 40 columns, but I think the 40 still relates to basic 4 as this one relates to basic 3 there. So here, these are 8000 series computers. They're still open up just like that, but they've got 80 columns, so the 80 relating to the columns of 32k RAM. This has got 96k RAM, although it needs software to operate the extra 64k, but the board is in there. And the SK stands for separate keyboard. And yeah, that was a bit of a find. That was the styling of that was done by Porsche. They contracted them to do that.
Such a pretty computer, isn't it?
And it's
tiny computers these days look like that.
Yeah.
They'd be more popular.
And here we have a floppy drive, dual floppy drive. It doesn't actually work, but inside it still opens up just like the other ones. And a processor board. It's still got a 6502 in there, so it's pretty busy there, and costs just as much as one of those at the top.
This is, I brought along the Colour Computer 2. This is my least capable 8-bit machine I've got. Back in the day, these were cheaper than Commodore 64s. All my friends had Commodore 64s. We couldn't afford one, because they were like $500 and these were $200. So I ended up with a Colour Computer 2. They're 6809 based. They were a nice computer to learn, like BASIC originally. I never learnt assembler on it back in the day because I was a bit too young for that. Since then I've got a tape analog thing which works across, I've got 3 8-bit machines, a C64. I finally got one many years after I wanted one. I've got a MSX machine and this works with that and just about every other 8-bit that used a tape drive. And I bought myself a CoCo SDC, so I've got the SD card, and there are a few games still getting made, new games. This is written by a guy called Nick who lives in Brisbane. When he was a teenager he sold games to Tandy, Australia. There's a pretty good one about a donut dilemma, and anyway, he still writes some games. It's in semi-graphics mode. This thing being a power machine, and a lot of the games coming out of North America relying on NTSC artifact colours means the colours are quite shit in a lot of games. And yeah, anyway, so it's just a nice machine. I've got the whole library, of course, of everything, and it's just fun going through all the old games that I used to look on the shelves of the Tandy store and go, wow, and you know, they were $30 a game, and I got like $5 a month pocket money, so it was pretty impossible. The original CoCo one was about 1980, and in 1980 it would have been, you know, a pretty good value proposition, I think. This was came out in 82, and then the CoCo 3 came out in about 86, I think. The CoCo 3s are coveted and expensive these days. These are reasonably cheap, and in New Zealand they're hen's teeth, but in Australia they're pretty cheap to buy. They're also pretty much exactly the same machine as Dragon 32s and Dragon 64s, and a lot of the Dragon games, because they didn't have the artifact colours, a lot of the Dragon games are actually the better games to play now than the original CoCo games. Yeah.
So I brought along my 2GS, which I brought along last year, 2 years ago now, wasn't it? I think. Which has a few upgrades. I've got a stereo sound card in it because when they, I don't know if anyone's sort of familiar with what happened with 2GS, but they sort of basically made it a lot less powerful and did a lot less things than it should have been able to do. So it had stereo sound, but you had to buy a third-party card to access it. The speed's quite slow, it's like 2.8 megahertz, so I've actually got a Transwarp GS accelerator on the way, which is not in it at the moment. I've also got an Ethernet card, so I got that going again the other day. So just doing some very basic text-based browsing, and also a CFFA 3000, which is a compact flash and USB reader. So that's why both these computers here have no floppies because I'm running off sort of SD card, USB, so forth. The Commodore 64, it's got a couple of upgrades. One, which probably most of you probably know about, is the power supply. I've got a newly made one, which I ordered from overseas because they're infamously unreliable and they have a power surge, which I think which can fry this whole computer and I believe you can't really fix them either because they're sort of full of epoxy resin and they're just like completely sealed units. So and after 40 plus years, whatever, you're not going to rely on those. But I also have a SD card reader in this, and if you with the fast loader, it's sort of it's reasonably quick to sort of load games.
But this was a funny one. This is a machine that I got going in 2018, and it was recently on the Facebook post I got dug up, so I thought I'd bring it today. And in true IBM fashion, we powered it up yesterday. Paid my daughter $5 to do it. I just left the room. But it's working now, or should be. But this is the original IBM PC with the optional expansion unit. And I just think the whole thing's hilarious. Like, we thought this was a good idea. I mean, this is ridiculous. So we've got the original floppy drives down here, 10 meg hard drive, and I've snuck a 20 meg in behind there as well. But it's very slow.
It's about to take off though, isn't it?
Yeah, it should launch any second now. Because it was getting the expansion unit, this is just an old IBM PC from Christchurch Polytechnic. It's not in great condition, so I used it for the expansion unit. I gave it 640k of RAM and just fully expanded it. But my other one I've kept is just an original 256k machine. So it's just as an IBM PC experience, but the 640k of RAM means this one takes a month to start up. This is a machine from my youth. I'm not an expert on the Amstrads, but I personally do quite like them. I think they've got good graphics and sound. Not quite as cool as the Commodore 64, but still good. And I love that it's an all-in-one unit. One thing actually I didn't like about the Commodore 64 was it had cables everywhere. With this, a bit different because I got the wrong monitor on it, but one power plug is all you need for the entire system unit. That was the whole idea. Everything just runs off the monitor, so it's, other than the joystick on the side, it's all in one. They use these 3-inch discs, which are pretty unique, but what's amazing about these is just the reliability of them. They still work fine today. I think, other than discs that were sealed, like my 5 1/4 for the PC, probably half of them are dead, but these ones have just been absolutely amazing.
Hello, so I don't know about up and running, because I've never actually turned it on yet. Haven't got a power supply, haven't got a screen that would work with my Jupiter Ace. So actually kind of like the Jupiter. I really wanted Jupiter for a very long time, and spent a long time with many eBay options, always being outbidded by people paying more than I was ever willing to pay. And then finally last year I was just kind of lucky to get one on a reasonable kind of price. I've kind of brought along the ZX81 and the Spectrum because they're its kind of cousins. And in some ways, there's a lot of similarities between them in terms of their designers and the like. Key difference about the Jupiter Ace compared to all kind of other 8-bit computers at the time is that it didn't come with BASIC built in, it came with Forth. I don't know Forth myself. What kind of attracted me at the time when I was like 15 and stuff, like reading about computers at the time, is that it was described as 10 times faster than a Spectrum. But obviously I didn't really understand at the time, but now I understand what it meant was that fourth is 10 times faster, being much closer to kind of the machine than the basic. It's actually got the same sort of CPU, very small amount of memory like the ZX81. There wasn't very many made. It wasn't a huge success, obviously. Maybe there's about 4,000 in total. It's kind of hard to tell. There was actually another model. There was only 800 made. So they're very rare and very fragile because something like the Spectrum feels so robust that the plastic, this is kind of plastic is often described as akin to yogurt carton.
Yeah,
it does have a kind of rubber keyboard, much like the Spectrum. That's why it sits somewhere between. It's mono. I just think it's like, the thing I've liked about it is it just looks amazing, I think. I just think it looks beautiful. It's not a computer to use, for me anyway, I'm sure other people do, but I just think it just looks gorgeous. And it's also quite, quite vivid with its white, quite a big contrast between them. You could get like RAM expansions, which cost a fortune. There was a small number of games that were produced. So the Jupiter Ace was marketed by a company called Jupiter Cantor.
Okay.
And there's a company was formed by Richard Outweiser and Stephen Vickers, who have been on the design team for the ZX Spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
So they kind of left and thought, actually, we could do this ourselves. It did end up going under, and they were being sold off for like £50 for a complete computer, which is cheap, but so many other computers are cheap too.
So this is the Sharp PC 7200. When we turned it on, it made a horrendous grinding noise, which I initially thought was the 20 meg hard drive that these came with. So I actually biffed that hard drive, and to my horror, the grinding noise continued. I found out it was actually the 5 1/4 drive. To go back a bit, there's 3 models in this series. So there was the PC 7000, a 7100, and a 7200. This is the 7200, which was the last of that series. So it's a 286 machine with a 20 meg hard drive and a single 5 1/4. The PC 700 was an XT class machine with 2 floppies, no hard drive, and then the 7100 was slightly faster. I don't know if the 7100 came with a hard drive as an option or not. You can, being the 7200 or the last in the series and more 286 era, it has a little bit of expansion, so there's an ISA slot actually hiding in the bottom. So I'm really keen to try and put an XT IDE in there and actually be able to boot off a hard drive, because at the moment, since that drive is dead, I've been booting off floppies, which is generally rather painful. It's questionable whether that ISA slot is actually a full functional, or if I can actually boot from that, so we'll see how that works out. There's space for a nickel cadmium battery, which thankfully I don't have in there. That would have made it obviously a lot heavier. I don't actually know sort of what runtime you used to get. It's a very robust machine.
It looks solid, doesn't it?
It's very solid.
Looks like a Singer sewing machine.
Yeah. I'm impressed they had the battery for it as well. Because a lot of these sort of luggables, they didn't.
Well, the nice thing about it being the last in the series, obviously, that it's a 286. It does EGA, or is it CGA? I forget which one. And the screen is vastly better. So at home, that screen is fairly readable, and this light, it's not great. The earlier ones, I forget about it, you just go blind.
Yeah, I've got the XT, and it's horrible.
You just can't see, right?
Yeah.
There were also versions of that had a backlight, for sure.
So this has a backlight.
Oh, it does.
So is this LCD, is it?
Yeah.
Right.
And if you leave it for a couple of minutes, you'll see the backlight actually turn off. At home, that backlight, and you can also invert it. So for certain graphics, if you're playing certain games, the inversion would be better or worse. I was actually trying to find some games that would look good in mono on the LCD. It's pretty rough, even things like Tetris and stuff, because everything's, with CGA in mind or EGA in mind, so you're busy inverting it, going, is that usable, can I really see it? So it was actually the floppy drive that was making the enormous grinding noise, so I pulled that drive out and the hard drive and replaced it with a standard 5 1/4 just out of a 1.2 meg.
It's a very high quality, robust machine.
but the entire motherboard is covered in bodge wires. I've never seen a commercial machine, if you look at any of these machines, it's got 15 or more bodge wires, running from chips directly to, select line, all sorts of things. And you don't see that in or photos that I've seen of a 700 or 7100. So I don't know if that's an early unit where they were still, traces were not there, or they rushed in production. I'm not sure, but I've never seen a commercial machine just be coated in hot glued bodge wires everywhere. And luckily they're all held up and none of them are broken, and I took lots of photos because obviously when I was handling the board and things, it would be pretty easy to rip a bodge wire off. So I took a bunch of photos, but yeah, it's good. It's kind of fun going. I'm really keen to actually plug a screen into it. I don't personally have an EJ or a CJ screen, and I come from, I grew up with an XT machine personally, but I forgot that EJ and CJ doesn't even take a D-sub VGA cable to plug it in. I went, oh, okay. It'll be interesting to see those same games actually, we'll be able to see most of it. And like you were saying about the scan converters, I highly recommend the RetroTink 5X. That's probably the single best upscaler and scan converter that you currently can buy. But annoyingly, they don't do EGA and CGA and that sort of thing, or at least as far as I know. So I might have to look into something, because to me I wanted to use it as an XT, or a machine to play XT era games, but with that display it kind of ruins that experience. It's a bit rough. So I'd be really keen to convert that, EGA, CGA, whatever, and get it into a RetroTink or something, and then, yeah. Otherwise, it's pretty good. It's very robust, and hopefully it'll just keep going.
Cool. Okay, so on the face of it, this one here looks like a 5150. It's got the same chassis. It also looks like the 5160, but it is, which is the XT, the one that came directly after that. But this one came 3 years after the 5160. This is the 5162. The strange thing about this is they had the 5170 before this machine. So it's all kinds of wrong in the evolution of IBM. So legend had it that the 5162 came out because they had too many of the old IBM XT style cases left over. I don't know if that's a myth. It might be complete lies, but that's the one I'll go with until somebody looks at my YouTube channel and says, no, you've been talking absolute bollocks and all that stuff. But what it's got, when it came out, I don't think this is the original Model M clacking key that came with it, but it certainly is one of the period correct ones. But the interesting thing about the 5162 is that it is a 286 processor. So it's not an XT, it's not a 8-bit only bus, it's a 16-bit bus with the 16-bit ISA slots. It's almost the same as the 5170 AT machine. If you look at the CPU, it's exactly the same 6 MHz 286 processor, but what it does have, which is a bit different, is 0-weight state RAM, and instead of the RAM being all on the board in chips, it's actually got SIMs. So it's a 640K capable machine. If you know the 5170, the 5170 had 512K, and it was a bit tricky to get it upgraded past that. You had to get something like an expansion card. This machine itself has been tricked out fairly well. It's got not an XT IDE, because the XT IDE would work in it because it's not an XT. So it's got an IDE controller card with a compact flash adapter. So I've got a 2 gig compact flash adapter in it. What else has it got? It's got a some sort of form of RAM card. I can't remember what it is right now. I think it might be an AST. Yeah, it's an AST of some description, Rampage, I think it is, and that gives it 16 megabytes of memory, which is far too much, and it takes forever to do its RAM test every single time. So that's why it's switched on right now. Yeah, what else has it got? It's the original floppy disk drive is this one here, and I believe it had, when I bought it, it had 2 of these. One of them being the low density one, and you can tell which one was the low density because it had a little asterisk on it. Yeah, and it was said in the manual that it was a bad idea to put your high density disks in the low density drive, or maybe it was the other way around. Anyway, don't format one with the other, was the general indication, because you would die quite quickly. So this machine also has an EGA display adapter in it, an ATI all-in-wonder I think it is, and this here is the IBM EGA display, which is pretty difficult to get here. In fact, the whole setup here is really difficult to get in New Zealand. I use this machine quite a lot, like far too much for a retro machine. So I've got a network adapter in it, I go on the internet with it, I connect to my Raspberry Pi, which has got Telnet on it, and I write code in it, which is just really stupid, but it's kind of enjoyable, because I think the thing about retro, which probably all know, is when some electronics heat up, it emanates a smell, right? And maybe it's just burning dust, I don't know, but especially from the monitors, when they heat up, there's this smell and it brings you back to your youth. And it doesn't matter whether it's a PC or a Commodore 64 or Speccy, but there's a smell, and that's getting especially about the CRT monitors. But yeah, so that's it. It's got Windows 3.0 on it as well. I don't ever use that, but it runs remarkably well, which is very odd. And I've been trying to task swap with DOS through some shims and get it to do things that generally it wasn't supposed to do. I've got a web browser called Microweb as well, which runs in CGA and maybe even EGA mode, which is pretty usable. And the floppy drive there is a 720K IBM drive. I can't remember where I fished that out from, but it's sort of period correct. I think it came out of an AT actually. And this is one of not the original Microsoft mouse, but I think because the original one had green buttons or something. It was very garish kind of colour, but this one I think came in one of the boxes that came with the monitor. The actual machine itself, I've never seen one of them in New Zealand. I'm sure somebody has, but I haven't. And I looked for a very long time, and I got this machine from the UK on eBay, and it cost far too much. Just going to forget that and just move on. But anyway, that's the machine. Any questions?
What could the 286 processor, what could that be upgraded?
Well, actually, that's a very good question. I should have pointed that one out. Nothing. It sort of could, but if you want to upgrade the processor, what you need to do is change out the clock crystal itself, so you have to desolder it. So IBM, being IBM, almost not quite as bad as the Commodore with the holes actually in the board, but they made it pretty difficult to upgrade. So yeah, you have to desolder the clock itself and solder a new clock on, and the whole thing doesn't really work very stably above 8 megahertz. So you could put an 8 megahertz CPU on it, and I think you can get it up to about 10. And there's a guy called Control Reese on YouTube who actually has one of these, and he's done that. But he tried it, I think, at 12 and a 10, and then he got it pretty stable at 8 megahertz. So it is possible. Yeah, I'm happy to take the lid off this and show you inside. It's actually got an 80287 XL Math CoPro on it as well, which is pretty much a 387 CoPro. It's basically slightly cut down 387 in a 287 slot or something.
Is that mouse, is it a serial mouse?
It is. Yeah, it's the original. It comes with a converter to 9-pin, but it's a DD25. Yeah.
What sound card?
That's a Sound Blaster 16, I think. Yeah. He's obviously period correct, but it's the AdLib sound coming out of that. But yeah, Sound Blaster. All right, go.
Oh, I can move the whole screen.
Oh, what?
Oh, is that just? Oh, I was holding down control and you can move the screen around.
The CoCo. So TRS 80 colour computer.
Yes.
But some games are just black and white, even though it says it's colour.
Because this would be an NTSC artifact.
Ah, right, okay.
Oh, that one looks fun. That one looks fun. Can I try it? Yeah, I know Spectravideo.